Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us on April Fool's Day. Probably could have timed that better, but thank you very much for your time. As I've mentioned, for those that have joined subsequently, we do have a Q&A, so please feel free to use that if you do have any questions in between. Today's session is part of our JSL, or probably towards the end of our JSL series now. And it's why JSL isn't a compliance problem, and that is a very deliberate name. We all know that JSL is a compliance issue, but it's not necessarily a compliance problem. It does affect the entire market and the entire business. What we're seeing right now is a shift in compliance. So we just want to have a conversation between myself, and I'm joined by a colleague in the industry. I'm joined by Jack, who is a fantastic workforce advisor for end clients, but I'll let him introduce himself in a moment. But the reality is, we just want to give you some practical takeaway bits of information. This isn't a legal review, as I've discussed in previous webinars. If you want that, please speak to a lawyer. We are here to give actual on the road, on the ground advice and what we're seeing. So I'll just run through what we'll cover, and then we'll do some intros. So we're going to, once again, just cover off what JSL actually is and what's really happening inside the umbrella market right now. Second, how decisions are being made. That's PSLs, accreditations, what people are relying on, and where they may be going wrong. And third, this is where definitely relying here completely on Jack, but what we're seeing from end clients and entire supply chain perspective, and where all this is heading in the future. So the aim is really simple. We just want to give you some clarity and challenge a few assumptions on the way. So this is a relaxed conversation between Jack and I. And hopefully we trigger some questions from you all. If you do have anything, once again, please pop it in the Q&A. So who are we and who am I? We are Ovio. We're a UK workforce and employment solutions provider. We focus very much on compliance, complete visibility and controlling risk for our end clients and agency partners. We are a very practical, evidence-led, no-nonsense business. So we are here for you. We offer all the services that a traditional legacy umbrella will offer, whether that's umbrella PAYE or CIS, but we do it much more built for the future. We have an absolutely fantastic platform that you will gain access to as a client of ours. And from there, you can see an overarching view of everything that's going on in the industry and what's going on with your workers. So who am I? I'm Joe. I'm the CEO here at Ovio. I've got 20 odd years experience working within recruitment, payroll and workforce compliance. I have the pleasure of helping advise HM government on some of these issues. Can't always promise they listen, but I do try. And I work closely with agencies and boards on de-risking and reforming their workforce engagement. So thanks to marketing for writing that. It makes me sound a lot better than I am. I'm going to pass you over now to Jack so he can introduce himself and what he does here at Freeflexer.
Thanks, Joe. Nice to be here. This is such a great photo of me. Thank you. I know I provided it, but there's something. Maybe I look too relaxed here.
I think it's the lighting. It's perfect lighting.
So my name is Jack Spencer. I'm a flexible workforce specialist. I spent most of my career at the intersection between technology and people. I was a very early hire at a company called Juno, which at the time was a small startup and is now an international freelancer management system and flexible workforce marketplace. A couple of years ago, I started my own business called Freeflexer. We're a advisory and consultancy service, but really grounded in the practicalities of how work gets delivered. The reason behind starting Freeflexer was really quite a simple, small idea, and it was after implementing over 100 enterprise technology solutions with mid-market and enterprise customers. Every time I finished implementation, the technology was ready to rumble. I would try and throw the keys to the business, and there was no one there to catch them. And that trend still exists today, particularly in mid-market, which is where I focus. So Freeflexer came out of that small kernel of idea of how do we actually enable organizations to manage, govern, and sort of operationally ensure that flexible workforce or like non-payroll workforce can flow through a business. Increasingly, that is part of the core, a core cohort of work and how work is delivered. And as such, it should also have the sort of governance and control and visibility and budget and attention and ownership, all of that stuff that you'd put on a permanent workforce. So I help businesses create that blended workforce through, as I say, operational, programmatic governance and a bit of strategy as well.
Amazing, mate. And before we sort of jump into all of the JSL related stuff, how are you seeing the overall market out of interest? We've had a lot of attacks, if you want to call them that, on the industry as such, with IR35, onshore immediate legislation, umbrella reform.
There's two camps, and I think there's two camps in, you know, we could look at this all the way down the supply chain. There's two camps. There's the sort of people that are really wedded to the status quo and they want to just navigate each individual challenge as it comes, really playing sort of compliance whack-a-mole. And then there's organisations and suppliers all the way down that supply chain that to me feel a bit more progressive and but more like, well, if we took a step back, maybe there's a different strategy, a different approach here that would make everyone's lives a bit easier, but crucially not just avoid problems, but actually unlock benefits. So there's two clear trends. We'll talk a little bit later around some of the patterns I'm seeing, but awareness is low. Knowledge is low. So like the capability to actually deal with this stuff internally is quite low. And the plan for sort of remediation is somewhere between thin and non-existent. So, look, to me, that's it's interesting to be in rooms and talk to clients about that. But to me, that all of those signals are huge opportunities, and this hopefully isn't going to be a conversation about like we're all doomed. This is about how do we unlock those opportunities and what's next.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just to echo that, one thing I would say is that for all of these changes in our space, the sector is extremely resilient and is needed. Yeah. And I think what's quite interesting, the current consultation that's going on, because yes, there's another one coming, it is actually being recognised by central government now that, you know, that the flexible workforce, whatever you may call it, intermediaries, contingent labour, is a critical part of UK PLC. So I'm pleased that the government are taking it seriously. But let's wait and see.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you, mate. So just moving on. So yeah, just wanted to really start with a bit of an uncomfortable truth that I'm seeing in the market. I don't know about you, Jack, but yeah, most of the market is still very unclear on what JSL actually means. Yeah. We're starting to see decisions being made really quickly and not always well. And you know, I've been open and honest about that with clients. Big equals safe has become the default shortcut. But really the key point is that risk hasn't really disappeared. It's impossible. It's just moving. Sometimes upstream, but it's always been there. This risk isn't new. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. And this legislation is new, but this risk is not new.
Look, anyone that tells you can eliminate risk is pulling a leg. Risk exists in everything we do. Get out of bed in the morning, you're at risk. Stay in bed all day, you're also at risk. Different risks, right? So yeah. You can't avoid it. You can minimize it and you can mitigate it. You can try and control it and avoid surprises. But even a really well sort of run end client operation where they've got the total visibility and control of that supply chain, they've done all their classifications, all the right to work checks, everything is surfaceable in the blink of an eye. Even those customers, I would expect to have something like 3 to 5% of what that spend is set aside for contingencies around risk, whether that's liability, operational, reputational. We'll talk about the different types of risk later, but you can't do anything without the risk. But the other point I'd make here is that I'm getting real like IR35 energy from this stuff. I implemented sort of 30 or 40 different IR35 solutions back in initially 2019, 2020, 2021. It took 3 years of my life, unfortunately. But organisations waited till the night before, some of them, to sign the contract. And I'm not talking about small organisations. I'm talking about some of the UK's biggest media businesses, publishers, technology companies. And then they stayed up till 6 a.m. for a week, remediating all their contracts and trying to get on the right side of the legislation. So I'm seeing that pattern again of like a bit of head in the sand. Hope it goes away. But I'm also seeing the people that are winning here, the people that have grabbed it, acted on it, and have a policy and process around it that not just mitigates the risk and compliance factors, but the operational factors. A really good example of a company that got this wrong, I think, would be one of the large IT providers in the UK decided when I-35 came in, no more freelancers, no more PSCs. And they made that, the legal team made that decision in isolation, in a vacuum. And whilst legally sound and from a compliance perspective, very, very rigorous, what they hadn't accounted for was, well, they hadn't even asked what this is going to do to talent and skills. And what they found was no one wanted to work with them anymore, because the high skill, white collar sort of freelance community was like, well, I'm freelance for a reason, mate, and I'm not going to go on to payroll. So finding that balance is really important, but I'm seeing some organisations already making quite strange unilateral decisions. But we'll talk about those, right?
Yeah. No, I agree with you, mate. And I think I always hark back and I think back to R35, and I know we don't really name clients, but I'll name HMRC. And HMRC did the same, and then realised they couldn't roll out MTD quick enough because they had no contractors left. So I know what you're saying. Quick knee-jerk reactions are sometimes very costly.
There's lots of irony in this legislation change. That's certainly one of them. The other one was all the organisations that around I-35 put their contractors onto umbrella, and now are finding that actually that sort of cure-all magic solution isn't quite as robust as they hoped it was. So yeah, irony surrounds us in this piece.
Yeah, and I think the key word you hit earlier was whack-a-mole. So I've just read a new consultation which literally invites the return of PSCs if they implement it. So that'll be really interesting. I'll just run through a little bit of a basic, what is JSL? So, I know everyone's probably sick to death of JSL by now, but basically in its really purest terms, it's where if PAYE and NICs aren't paid correctly by an umbrella or within the supply chain, HMRC can now recover that loss from the exchequer from other parties. So it's not just the umbrella company. That is really key. It means agencies can be exposed, and in some cases, end clients as well. So it isn't really about checking, whether a provider is just compliant and moving on. It's about really understanding where liability sits, and are you in a defensible position if something goes wrong? Because obviously the easiest response is you work with a compliant provider. There is no change. Ultimately, that is what this boils down to. HMRC's aim here, and I spoke to policy when they were writing this, and they were shocked by this. By the way, this wasn't what HMRC wanted. I think we all need to remember that HMRC wanted, if you ever remember back to the consultation, they wanted option B. They got a version of option C. HMRC want this to clean up the market. It is that simple, and that includes the umbrella market and the agency market. Those agencies, those umbrellas that have always been compliant, who have always had a bit of a competitive disadvantage, HMRC policy were very much aiming the legislation at supporting them. And I think that is something that I'm seeing come through loud and clear. And that's why you're not seeing, I think, blanket bans on umbrella like you did see blanket bans on PSCs. And I do think that is the right thing. Interested to know what you think, mate, on that.
No, I agree. I think there's a natural sort of decision which will be fewer suppliers, more control. I think the decision points around which suppliers those are really interesting, particularly when we look at HMRC's sort of tribunals and cases against umbrellas. We're actually not talking about necessarily small individuals, like I think who have this idea of it's like it's some sort of nefarious bad actor that's sort of hoarding away tax. Actually, there's quite a lot of just like malpractice from big organisations that haven't done a very good job. But we are talking about huge organisations, huge amounts of money. Like if you look at the sort of tribunals that they've been pursuing, so there is a very real risk there. But yeah, we're expecting to see organisations have a better grip on what's happening. I'll talk later in the webinar about awareness of this stuff, because it is startling.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, cheers, mate. I'll try to rattle through a little bit more of the content, and then we'll get down to the sort of more juicier stuff. So I just want to I think sometimes it's easier with a real example of what JSL can do. So you've got a picture of a contractor working through an umbrella company. They're often paid weekly. Payslip does look fine. So you've done some due deal, you're looking for payslips, but 6 months later, HMRC audits the umbrella, finds unpaid taxes, the umbrella collapses or it disappears or was never actually onshore. That is a risk. Under JSL, HMRC will immediately move upstream. So this is where we're kind of seeing how HMRC want to apply this legislation. So they're going to look at who introduced the worker, which agency placed them, and who benefits from the labour. So that's quite important. That's where we can, drag in clients potentially. They will then pursue those parties. Agencies can then inherit, historic tax debt created by somebody else, through no fault of their own. And this is why what we've said, and I think you've said this time and time again, paperwork alone just won't save you. It is all about financial exposure and that real time checking.
Yeah, so, going back to the I-35 thing again, we have there's so much goodwill around I-35 if you do the reasonable care piece, and if HMRC come in, they'll actually almost go, you know what, you've got the process, you've got the classification tool, you've got the insurance, like this actually smells like a company that's got their house in order, and there's plenty of low-hanging fruit for us, so we'll move our attention. This isn't that. This is there's a tax debt, you're on the hook. It's a bill. It's not an investigation.
yeah, there's no invite. It is just a bill. You are quite right. This is always a fun one. Purported umbrella. This was. I remember when we all got the legislation, the draft legislation, and we were reading it, and everyone was like, "Oh, HMRC have made a mistake. HMRC have created this purported umbrella. Do they know what they've done?" So just to really cover what purported umbrella is in reality, it's where there is no defined umbrella within the supply chain. So if you operate an internal PAYE, for example, as an agency, then HMRC may treat you as the purported umbrella company. So it means then that the liability sits between an agency and their end client. As I say, everyone thought it was an unintended consequence. I remember being on the call with HMRC going through the advisory panel, and we asked them, and we was like, "Is this an unintended consequence?" And they were like, "Absolutely not. It's why this is not umbrella legislation. This is intermediary legislation." So this was very much written in to catch, where there's an offshore or whether there's in-house PAYE that these may be potentially not accurate. They still want that they still want that, and I think ultimately I was almost begrudgingly impressed with HMRC for getting this through, because it did come out of nowhere. I don't think anybody in any type of, the REC or apps going on was expecting this. I don't know what you think, mate.
Yeah. No, I think I also think it's pretty canny of them, because this is the thing, one of the things that moves this up the supply chain another step and creates a real concern for the end client. Because this isn't all about liability and tax mitigation. This is about control and visibility and understanding what's happening downstream, and that visibility doesn't tend to be there. And why should it have been? Because since the dawn of time, that liability was ring fenced. That was kind of the point. So this little nuance, and this is about as exciting as this process and legislation has got, right? This was as scandalous and salacious as any of us we really got exercised about this. But
this was the spicy bit.
This is the spicy bit. But this is as exciting as it got. But this is one of the nuanced pieces that JSL isn't really on the radar, but this certainly isn't.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I'm finding really interesting, obviously I'm not as exposed to the end client sort of part of the supply chain as much as you, but where I am, they're now fully insistent that there is a genuine umbrella company in the supply chain to protect themselves.
It makes sense, right?
Yeah, as soon as there is, it severs the link, and I obviously wholeheartedly support it. But ultimately, I think it was very intelligent at HMRC to do this. I think, and that when I was this harks back to that wish they had, which was to protect the compliant end of the umbrella market, of which it's large. It's somewhere up to 300,000 or 400,000 contractors at any one time. It's a big part of the economy. So they wanted to, like we say, ring fence and support that end of the market. And this is the mechanism I think they've done, they've created to do that. So
yeah,
congratulations to HMRC. I've said that once. That's what they're going to get. They get that annual from me, and that's it.
Inside the umbrella market, so I would like to take the opportunity to play devil's advocate or agent
You go
provocateur.
You go
I think
for
it's
it,
really
mate.
interesting. I'm chronically on LinkedIn, which is a problem that I'm trying to resolve, but I'm on LinkedIn a lot. And I think it's really interesting that the umbrella recruitment staffing industry is quite inside baseball. Like everyone's talking in sort of industry terms, and lots of talking about very specific clauses in legislation and updates to sort of services and T's and C's and all that kind of thing. But I think for end clients, it's all really mystifying still and confusing. And one of the things that I've seen is organisations choosing like large sort of name recognised brands as umbrellas to add to their PSLs. So I'd be interested to hear your take on like what a good vetting process would be for an umbrella, and what organisations are doing to sort of surface that credibility. Really, businesses. I'm a small business owner, and sometimes you speak to organisations and they're just more comfortable with a large brand, even if the service isn't sort of parallel to what you're offering. They just have a level of comfort with it. Is that what you're seeing in the umbrella market?
Yeah, I think so. I'll just talk about this in a little bit more, but in detail in a moment. But yeah, 100%. I think, if you're sitting there in a boardroom of a medium-sized, SME sort of employment business, and God forbid something goes wrong, and that you're sitting there in front of your CEO or CFO, and they're explaining, well, why did you choose X Umbrella Limited? And you say because they're one of the top 10. It's a really easy response, right? And I think that's fine, but it's more nuanced than that. It's a damn sight more nuanced than that. And I do think there is this misconception that because they're big, they've got big turnover, they've got all these massive cash reserves. They don't. That's the short.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was really surprised when we first sat down for a coffee. It was you sort of telling me about the margins. It'd be like, can you reveal a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, margin pressures. I just put margin pressure is real. Margin pressure in our space is insane. So if you think about this, when I joined the industry, properly in the umbrella industry 15 odd years ago, our average margin was around 24 to 25 pounds a week per contractor. That's what we all pretty much charged and retained as our profit margin. Now, the key difference between us and the agency market is that we are a pounds and pence margin. We charge £25. The agency sector charge percentages normally. That's quite normal. It's quite abnormal to charge a pound and pence figure to your client in the agency sector. So what happens is that their margin increases every year in national minimum wage and wage inflation. Ours, let's assume it stays static, stays the same, which obviously inflation has no pressure. What actually happened is since IR35, there's been so many new entrants to the market, mum and pop shop type umbrella companies or an accountancy being, oh, we'll give it a go, we'll charge a tenner. The margins have now come down. So we used to be at 24, 25 pounds a week back in, 2020. Or 2010, sorry. We're now probably all averaging around 18 to 20. So in time, you've also got inflation. I don't know about you, but my electricity bill's gone up. My wage bill's gone up. My rent's gone up. My own insurance has gone up. But yet what we're charging has gone down. So margin pressure is really difficult. And what we're starting to see is people... and why that's a risk is you're starting to see smaller providers that are maybe struggling because they don't have scale, have to make some decisions that maybe encourage non-compliance. And I think that is something that we just need to be aware of in the space. So when your umbrella is coming back and you're maybe pushing back on the margin or saying we need to increase it, it's to protect you. Ultimately, it is to protect the supply chain. We're not doing it because someone wants a new yacht. It is really to make sure that we have enough money just to do what we do. Some providers I know are cutting corners to compete. There's lots of, and this is something you're starting to see with large umbrellas. There's lots of legacy liabilities in the market. If you've been turning over 500 million for the last 10 years, that is HMRC can go back sort of 6 or 7 years. That's a lot of liability that is there. Not all providers are definitely built for the level of scrutiny that's needed, so they don't open up. And I think the gap between what looks compliant and is compliant is widening. So there are some insurances coming out on the market. There are some indemnities I'm seeing. There are people signing PGs. I get that. If it gives you a sense of comfort, fine, but that can't be the be all and end all. And that's something I'm definitely pushing back on.
That margin piece is really interesting because it highlights the one of the sort of risks that I bring to customers isn't the tax liability piece, because that's quantifiable and to some extent manageable. It's what happens if the chain breaks, and I think that resonates much more with end customers because it's stability. They need this agility in their workforce. They need to be able to flex up and down really quickly. If they've got a particularly demanding customer or a customer that's hard to predict, they need this stuff. But if that little fringe case of workers has become a core part of your workforce delivery, and all of a sudden they're not on site because they're not being paid and they're not insured and they're not they're not compliant, actually overnight you're not just risking tax liability, you're risking almost existential risk. If that's a major client to your business and you can't deliver, it's a real problem, that piece.
It is, absolutely, mate. And it is something that there isn't a silver bullet, so don't pretend there is. I think it's a multitude of things.
I wasn't going to.
Please. Talking of silver bullets. So yeah, accreditations. I know your favourite thing in the world. I wish it was, because I've got them. So you kind of want, as a provider, I'd love to say, oh, don't worry about me. It's fine. We've got this accreditation or that accreditation. I just think for me, what they're really good at is just to be in a really good baseline.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not like oh my God, we've got SafeRec, you're absolutely fine, or FCSA, you're absolutely fine. I think there needs to be baseline standards and they all do slightly different things, and I think that can be confusing for the market. But ultimately, all they do is just improve that consistency, that transparency. But we need to remember that some of them are, just in time, one point in time annual assessment. Others are ongoing. There's a plethora of different accreditations out there. But it should be part, like I said there, I'll try to finish it with something quite succinct. It should be part of the picture, but not the whole decision. You need to do your own due diligence as well.
Okay. Going back to that solvency and margin piece, mate. To what extent? I don't know how the accreditations work. I imagine it's looking at your sort of SOPs and compliance and so on. But do they look at solvency and balance sheet?
Yes. Yeah. Not enough, in my opinion. So yes, there are liquidity tests for most of these accreditations. I think they're not necessarily the strongest liquidity tests, and I wouldn't be shocked if they're being urgently reviewed at the moment by all accrediting bodies, because now it never really was a problem. You didn't hear of umbrella failures 5 years ago, 10 years ago. But now, with a combination of really tight margins, lots of very small players, you're now at a point where a single loss of a client to an umbrella could result in a failure. So I think, it needs to be something that is actively monitored, and it's something that definitely here at Ovio we're really proud of. Is the strength of our liquidity. And other key decisions, I'll talk about them in a moment, but things around credit, that's a major risk, in our space, is if we're not paid as an umbrella, do you know what? We've probably already paid your worker. So, money doesn't grow on trees. So credit's a major problem. And I think if you start adding all this together with a poorly run provider that maybe got really tight margins, and credit, then you're really going to start coming up against some issues, I think. But yeah, that's sort of where I'm at with it, mate. I think it should be, and when I was on boards of some of these accrediting bodies, I pushed very hard for the liquidity tests to be substantially better than they are, and I do think that we still need to go down that path.
It feels like an important metric. It's what I bring up with clients a lot, because it's at least on parity with compliance and SOPs. Like, you have to be resilient if something goes wrong.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Absolutely. We touched on this a minute ago about what PSLs are being made. Yep. You hit down head: brand recognition, turnover, accreditations, safety and size, speed of onboarding, commercial terms. They're all good stuff, I think. But what I'm seeing is financial strength. It's missing substantially. I always remember in previous kind of periods outside of JSL, I think when we used to work with about 150 agencies in a previous employer that I had. One asked to see our balance sheet. Blew my mind. What's the credit policies? That's missing. There should be a written credit policy. You should be insuring your debt, in my opinion, should be mandatory, but I get that it's an operational decision for every umbrella because it's a commercial decision. But ultimately, the credit policy should be there to give our clients confidence that you're a very well run agency, but maybe there's a not so well run agency that works for that umbrella. Could that drag down your supply chain? Operational transparency is really important, and then evidence of real compliance. And what I mean by that is sort of real time compliance. Our pay slips being checked weekly with something like SafeRec. That is is our HMRC tax accounts being looked at monthly, which is probably the most appropriate time frame, in my opinion. So it's a whole world out there. I don't know what you're seeing. I don't think this gets down to the end client level. That
was the interesting bit I was going to mention, is that there is a big part of this conversation missing. And actually, if liability can swim upstream and bite the end client on the bum, then they do have skin in the game. That's a horrible mixed metaphor, sorry. But what I'm saying is the idea that these are decisions that can be made in isolation, I think is incorrect. And what we'll start to see is more and more organisations saying, I want a say in what's happening one layer down in my supply chain, because what might be good for the goose isn't good for the gander. And if you've made a decision based on commercials or rebates or something along those lines, that doesn't benefit my organisation in any way. And if you want to keep my business, then this is what your PSL should look like. So to me, that's one of the big missing talking points in this whole conversation so far, is that these decisions are being made in isolation by intermediaries and agencies and recruiters. And actually, I think once this starts to surface more and more, we see a couple of prosecutions start to flow through. What we'll see is sort of tax bills appear. What we'll start to see is organisations taking a much keener interest in what's happening in the different strata of the supply chain.
Yeah, completely agree. And on that point, we are aware, HMRC have made the industry aware that there are some cases ready to rock and roll, probably in 6 days' time. So I do think there's going to be some relatively quick movement on this stuff. This is something that we're just seeing everywhere, which is that size does not equal safety. Once again, it's an indicator. Okay, so there's not a silver bullet. I don't know how many times I need to say it to everyone, but large providers do carry legacy issues, operational complexity, and definitely service bottleneck. So if service is important to you, which I hope it is, then you need to just be checking up on that. Are you willing for your contractors to maybe sit on a phone for 40 minutes whilst they're getting through to their payroll provider, the umbrella, to get an answer on a payslip question? If you're cool with that, then go with the top 3, top 5. But scale does not guarantee, as I said there, compliance quality, financial resilience, and visibility. That's where I'm at. And I always ask people, if your provider does fail tomorrow, what does that mean to you? Can you pay? Are you going to be able to effectively look after your contractors? Are they going to be able to attend site on Monday morning, or are they all going to walk? So I think ultimately that's where I'm at. And that's just the biggest risk that I'm seeing in the umbrella market. Obviously, I'm very aware that I am down on the umbrella end, so I'm really intrigued in the moment to get your point of view. Just conscious of time, but how Ovio helps. I've already said this, but we are built for the JSL world. So we are the new generation of provider. We've got real workforce visibility. We have a platform-led oversight, so you can see everything within the platform. You'll see exactly what's going on with Billy Bob. You'll see how he's engaged with us. You'll see questions with us. You'll see contracts. You'll see everything. We are integrated with SafeRec, so we are trying to encourage that real-time compliance. But ultimately, we're a business that is still completely accessible to you. So if you want to pick up the phone and talk to me, you can still talk to me. Some of these large providers, you're going to be very lucky to have an account manager, from what I'm hearing in the space. So moving on to your kind of world, mate. Awareness. I know you were
this is
about
easy
this
one.
a lot.
No. Next slide.
Cool. Next. Yeah. Right. No, I'm with you.
So I talk to a lot of businesses, but I also work quite closely with a few chambers of commerce, and I speak at HR forums quite a lot. I'm doing one up here in Yorkshire in April around the sort of economic forum, and it's almost like there's a it's sort of in reverse order. The top level of awareness around regulatory shift is people looking at things like the Employment Rights Act, the Fair Work Agency coming down the pipe, and then there's a few bits that are just a total surprise, and I think this supply chain reform is one of them. I sort of brand it as that because it helps people understand it a little bit more. I think JSL and umbrella reform is a really misleading sort of way of interpreting it, and personally, I think HMRC's done it on purpose to not come across as like overly disruptive to the industry. But to me, this is the biggest like regulatory and liability shift, at least since IR35, but it actually might have a bigger impact when we talk about volume. So awareness tends to be very low. And then awareness, sort of more broadly speaking, is also very low of what's happening underneath the organisation. So because these types of workers tend to grow like organically, over time, it's almost like they wake up one day and this thing has grown arms and legs and they can't like quite control it anymore. And that is what the flexible workforce cohort usually looks like. They don't know what sort of terms they're being contracted on, how they're delivering their services. They don't necessarily know what the engagement model is. Is this a statement of work or a limited company freelancer? Have we got sole traders? Do we have loads of umbrella workers? They don't tend to know that stuff off the top of their head. And then if we go down a level, they definitely don't know what happens underneath a staffing agency or a recruitment agency or a supplier. The visibility is almost zero. So it's a real mindset shift and operational shift. It's a new capability that's having to be built. And that's sort of what Freeflexer helps organisations do. Can you stand up a program that actually gives them that ownership and visibility? Because if it's out of scope for everyone in the business and no one owns it, you're not going to manage to fix it. Like all of these things really are symptoms. I'd say the illness at the core of every business is ownership. And that's just because we're still in business structures that have existed for the last 30 or 40 years. And actually we need an update.
Yeah.
Visibility is poor. It's not an insurmountable challenge, I should add. Like there's things you can do really quickly to help yourselves understand this and start to minimise that risk. But yeah, it's a mindset shift.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest problems we've got is a lot of the knowledge is quite rightly down at, if you want to think of ends of the supply chain, is down my end of the supply chain. We I don't know, we've all got guides, we've all got white papers, we're all willing to go and talk to people. We have absolutely no mechanism to getting that to the end client. And it's actually we're relatively easy to get that stuff to our agency partners. Obviously, we've got direct relationships. We can go via the REC or APSCO or team or whatever it might be. We've got that convening power in our industry. I think what's really difficult is that no one knows how to convene with the end clients, and that is really interesting.
And as I say, to me that's a symptom of just maintaining the status quo, and things tick along without breaking, so we won't examine it too closely. And to some extent, it's not a lack of appetite; it's actually the opposite. It's I don't want to know, because that also creates liability. So when we find a customer, who does want to put this in scope and does want to assign ownership, and they actually have the appetite to change how they work. It's really refreshing. It's really exciting, and that's like the ICP we're looking for. Is there someone that's actually inside this business that has the appetite for change and improvement? The triggers for that might be numerous. That there could be like pressures, things like compliance or like spend or skills, or there could be opportunity. Like we do have customers come through the business that are like, we've won this business, we need to unlock our sort of flexible workforce capabilities, and build a launch pad for the future. We want to do more of this type of work. So we do get it from both angles.
Amazing. Yeah, fantastic. So what are you seeing right now? What is happening? Those you are having conversations with, obviously you're talking to the engaged people, but what's going on?
Discovery and diagnose is first. It's the old unknown unknowns problem of when we go into business, we'll start by trying to do a bit of benchmarking around what's actually happening, and often those will just be blank cells in a spreadsheet because there's genuinely no idea what's happening, which in itself is a benchmark. Like I always say, if you can't answer the question, in some ways that's actually quite useful to understand as well. But there's a diagnose and sort of discovery piece that's happening across most customers now. As soon as they understand that there's, sort of depends who you're talking to. If it's an FD, they'll tell me about tax liability. If you're talking to talent acquisition and HR, it's ops. If you're talking to business owners, they're very interested in reputational damage. So it depends like which stakeholder you're talking to. You might pull a different lever, but all of them, they're out in the same place of, we have to get a grip on what's happening downstream, and just wrestle back a little bit of control. Often authority can like flow upstream, and you can forget that you're the end client and you're paying the bills, right? So wrestle back a little bit of authority and start making some more conscious decisions. As I say, it's nobody's fault per se. It's that it's fallen through the cracks, and it's got to a point now of like sort of critical mass where, as I said before, there's that operational, reputational, and sort of financial problem that it needs addressing. So they are looking at PSLs and they're going a level deeper. We're absolutely seeing that. Also, there's opportunities for end clients, don't forget, from just a pure commercial perspective to review this stuff, because often you put someone in place, maybe a hiring manager signed some T's and C's 10 years ago, and those T's and C's are still in place and haven't been reviewed. And actually, it's an opportunity for the business to get their arms around what a PSL actually looks like. My experience with PSLs tends to be, it's just a list. There's nothing preferred about it. There's an opportunity there to sort of bring things into line. Compliance conversations, classification, how work is delivered, all of that stuff is super relevant to them, but often there's not the knowledge inside. I think one of the challenging things for the businesses at the moment is like, how the hell am I supposed to know how to navigate IR35 and some supply chain reform? Unless you're a specialist in that field, like it does feel quite unfair to expect a talent acquisition executive to manage it, or a hiring manager, or and this stuff tends to roll downhill, like inside organisations.
Yeah, it does. So, and I suppose where there is very little activity from HMRC around enforcement and compliance of IR35 at the moment, it is that temptation of if that's if that's what they want to do, we'll do it. And I think that is a risk that I'm starting to see, is that, like I've said, that rise of PSC again. I get it. Just got to be very aware of it.
That's the opportunity. That's one of the opportunities to me, and we'll talk about this at the end, I think, as the closing point. But the organisations in the supply chain, there's lots of opportunities here to get closer to your customers, and that is by offering a sort of diverse array of services and helping them understand what each operating model provides, how you can work with those types of people, how you can engage them and control them and manage them, etc. I think there's real opportunities here, but it requires a more strategic relationship, less transactional, and it's about helping them understand the market and the options available to them. I think when I speak to lots of suppliers, it can be quite transactional. It can be, this is how we've always done it. We will navigate this challenge, but we're not going to necessarily change direction altogether.
Fantastic. And I think we've pretty much covered this off, but I take it we're starting to see some behaviours change, which is important. Which is really
not
good.
Not as fast as I'd like. I think, I know I keep banging on about IR35, but the government could have done a little bit better, I think, at explaining. You might not have seen loads of tribunal wins go through, but actually what we have done is collect a lot of tax. And people have essentially used IR35 as a deferred tax bill. And I think we'll see that here with JSL as well. I don't know if they'll make a lot of noise about winning cases, but I do think they'll generate a lot of tax revenue.
They take so long, and they can only talk about it once they've won and once no one's appealed. So I do get it. I know there are active cases, but they're just slow, man, and I get it. I totally do get it.
I mean, that brings us on to this important bit. Like this supply chain piece is just one more signal in part of a large direction of travel. So when I talk to organisations, it's not just JSL and the Fair Work Agency and the Employment Rights Act. It's also other signals like HMRC. The Make Tax Digital thing is important to businesses. It shows that there is an appetite from HMRC to surface data much more quickly and digitalise their operations. That will continue to creep. And then we've got the HMRC tooling up with another 5,000 investigators to increase their capabilities around how they go about their job. All of those signals to me are pointing at a clear message, which is we need you guys, the end clients, to take greater accountability of what's happening in your supply chain. And we're going to share that accountability through a number of like different types of regulation. So the direction of travel is clear. What we're seeing to me is the government trying to play catch up. For years, the way work has been delivered has been evolving. And that's partly driven by the businesses, partly driven by the workers and like economic pressures. But now what we're seeing is the government saying, well, if you're going to change how you work with and engage workers, we'll update the employment regulation, the tax regulation, and crucially make sure that there's no more sort of gaping holes in our tax revenue. Because, you know, if you're going to change how you work, we still need to make as much money out of you as possible. So the direction of travel is clear, and it will continue to try and close that gap between what's happening in the contemporary workforce and how the legislation treats it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, MTD is a really good example of that. Everyone thinks MTD is just about, you know, getting quarterly data. They're very mistaken. You know, MTD is in my opinion, and it's not confirmed, but it is a direction of travel is purely to get, you know, quarterly tax revenue from these people, which will then eventually go to monthly, which means everyone's on basic PAYE. So I do, you know, that is the, you know, they'll say it's because they want to make it digital. It's already digital. No one submits a paper VAT form with a return or anything like that. So I don't agree with what's being spouted by HMRC, but I think that's
they want to get to a point that other European countries are at, as when you get the knock on the door, the decision's made, and it's not an investigation. It's here's the paper trail, here's the bill. That's what they want to get to.
Yeah, and like we've just said, and that brings us nicely towards the end. You know, this is a part of something much, much bigger. It's not a one-off change. You highlighted that. This is probably the biggest change, which is going to see more responsibility shifting upstream and more accountability on decision makers, because ultimately HMRC want the readies. They want the cash, and they think, I don't necessarily agree with their maths. I don't think the non-compliance is necessarily as bad as they say, but they want it, and they are using this as a bit of a sledgehammer to break a walnut, in my opinion. But what's your thoughts, mate, before we close?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it's I don't know if they're over egging it. I do think I'm always a bit like, before I started a business, I was always thought, I wonder, every time there's a budget, right, and people complain about how much tax they have to pay, like business owners, I always wondered, is that because you hate paying tax, or is it because it's like genuinely difficult running a business? And the answer I found out was it's a bit of both. But I do think there's tax holes. I do think the government needs money. I do. It's my feeling that we live in a pretty decent country in terms of, sort of services and existence day to day. So I do get it. I don't think any of these things are perfect. I'm highly sceptical of the sort of opposition parties saying that they would change it when they are the people that implemented a lot of this nonsense. So I sort of a word of warning, I suppose, against buying into that. They know that these are pieces of legislation that are here to stay. They know that they need them because they need the money. So it's not going to go away. But I think one of the reasons, if you go take I-35 as an example, one of the reasons I actually love that piece of legislation is there's shitloads of guidance around it.
Yeah.
And if you take the time to understand it, it's a real unlock for your capabilities. So I don't mind that sort of stuff. It just takes a bit of time to understand it and engage in it.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. No, completely agree. Sort of final thought. Yeah, I just want to leave it with everyone on the call is, are you compliant? Can you prove it? Can you defend it? Can you withstand failure in your supply chain? I think those are the key points that I would love people just to consider as we kind of draw this to a close. I was going to see if anyone's got any questions they want to pop in the Q&A. If not, we've got a couple from people that apologise they couldn't make it today.
While we load those up, Joe, let me just
Yes.
say that I think the are we compliant question is really it's a good one, because it could be the catalyst for something really exciting for your business. If you run an umbrella or a staffing agency, I think there's a really big opportunity here for the companies that successfully productize that notion and are able to serve it up in a easy to digest digital way. I also think we could be looking at a new sort of dawn of partnerships, not official partnerships that move the relevant party up the chain, but partnerships around doing more for your customers. I think if we're going to erode some of the compliance safety net, there's an opportunity here to do more and diversify your offering. So, to me, there's a big opportunity here for everyone in the supply chain if they grab it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, completely agree, mate. So I've got a couple of sort of questions here. One, I think we've pretty much covered though, which is why isn't accreditation enough to protect us? I'll start off probably because I've probably got the most experience of accrediting bodies. It comes down to, are they real time? Are they focused enough? So we've got lots of different accreditations out in our market. I don't think there is a silver bullet. So I don't think they're enough in that they're not all real time. Those that are real time are very much focused on the numbers. Obviously, that's what data is for. There's other risks. We haven't got into ERB. So I don't think they're enough, but they are a good indicator or a good starting point, should we say? Don't know if you've got any thoughts on accreditations.
Well, you can't hang your time with full strategy on them. It's as you say, it's a jumping off point and it completely makes sense, but you have to understand for yourself what's happening. One of the trends we're seeing is organisations being better at in-housing that understanding and knowledge. With legislation like this, it means you can't just rely on what you're being told by supply chain. You have to understand it for yourself. It's nice if the accrediting body can serve you up a report and say this is all of our evidence. I think that's a great thing, though.
Yeah, that's exactly where they should be going, and yeah, I completely agree. And then last but not least, we've got what are the red flags in reviewing umbrella providers? I'm going to ask you and let you take the lead on that one.
Oh, thanks.
What's your red flags?
Look, I would look at solvency, and then I would look at, if I ever want to test the compliance capabilities of a business, I give them a set of requirements and requests, and then I say serve them up now. I'm not giving you a day, I'm not giving you a week, give them to me now. And if that capability isn't there, that's a red flag. I as I said at the start, I come from that tech space, and if that stuff's not digitalized, I've got no confidence whatsoever that you've got the capability to remain compliant. So if you want to do a test like that, I would say give me 5 workers from this week, give me 5 workers from the last 6 months, and just pick some dates and say, give me the pay slip, give me the evidence, give me the reporting, show me what you've done with those people. And as I say, if that can't be served up in the moment, that's a red flag. I hope Ovio can do that, mate.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, I think the fun bit you get is when people want to see the relevant RTI, and they kind of have a misconception that our RTI might be just for them, and there's not 6,000 people on there that we need to go and redact because of GDPR. So we've got these conflicting, things that we need to work on. But yeah, no, it's definitely whether they can get it for you immediately or whether they're not, whether there's reticence to give it to you. I think that is probably where I would say, okay, it could be there's some issues as such that we might need to deal with.
Yeah.
Cool. That's it from me, mate. Unless you've got any final points you want to cover off, or if there's any other questions that people wish to ask. There's nothing in the Q&A for the guys on the call, so that's always good. Hopefully that means we've covered it, or they've all fallen asleep. I'm not sure. But yeah, for me,
Fair
as I
enough.
just said, visibility, mate, we were saying this at the start, weren't we? How do you make this fun? It isn't fun. It's just, it's got to be done. Like, it is just what it is. It's not a fun subject. I appreciate that. I don't work in the best industry for fun things. I went to a really good conversation a few days ago with the Royal Navy, and they get to talk about drones and
Yeah.
AI, and I get payroll.
Yeah.
So
You've made your bed. I'm sorry, mate.
I know. I would look good in that hat as well. Oh, well. Anyway, that's pretty much it, guys. If anyone does have anything they want to message me afterwards or Jack directly, we'll put out our contact details when we put out the video, and we've got some useful guides and stuff that we're more than happy to share.
Brilliant.
But thank
Thanks,
you very
guys.
much, Jack. Really appreciate it, mate. And thank you for everyone staying on the line. That was really good. Thank you.
Cheers, mate. Bye.